The gleaming chandeliers of Blue Pearl Restaurant cast a warm glow over the polished marble floors as Rain Chen wiped down another table, her feet aching from the 12-hour shift. It was nearly 9 p.m., and she still had 3 more hours to go. The fancy restaurant, nestled in the heart of Atlanta's business district, was where the city's elite came to see and be seen. Rain had gotten used to the weight of the heavy plates, the endless drink refills, and the occasional condescending glance from customers who saw her as nothing more than part of the furniture. But she didn't mind. Each night brought her closer to her dream, even if no one in the restaurant knew about it. Between serving tables, she'd sneak peeks at her phone, checking the study notes she prepared during her lunch break. The other servers thought she was texting friends, but those quick glances were her lifeline to a future beyond the restaurant's walls. Her uniform pocket held not just order notes, but also a folded reminder of tomorrow's mock trial preparation. That evening started like any other. The restaurant was bustling with its usual crowd of business executives in expensive suits, discussing million-dollar deals over perfectly seared steaks. Rain had just finished serving a family celebrating their daughter's graduation when she heard the commotion at table 12. A group of tech executives had arrived, led by a man whose face was plastered across local business magazines. Even if you didn't follow the tech world, you knew who Dev Patel was, the self-made millionaire whose software company had become Atlanta's latest success story. His reputation for being difficult preceded him, but tonight he seemed determined to outdo himself. Rain watched from the corner of her eye as he dismissed 2 servers already, complaining about everything from the temperature of the water to the spacing of the table settings. Her colleague Jin, usually unshakable, came back from their table looking flustered. "He's all yours," Jin whispered, passing her the table's assignment. "I can't handle another minute of this." Taking a deep breath, Rain adjusted her name tag and grabbed her order pad. She'd dealt with difficult customers before. After all, this was how she'd been paying for her secret night classes for the past 3 years. Little did anyone know that the simple waitress they saw before them had spent her afternoon discussing constitutional law with some of the city's brightest legal minds. As she approached table 12, Rain could feel the tension radiating from the group. Dev sat at the head of the table, his designer suit jacket casually draped over his chair, surrounded by what appeared to be potential investors. She noticed how he seemed to be showing off, speaking a little too loudly about his latest tech acquisition. "Good evening, I'll be taking care of you tonight," Rain said with a warm smile, her voice steady and professional. Dev barely looked up from his phone, waving his hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. One of his dinner companions, an older gentleman with kind eyes, at least had the grace to acknowledge her with a nod. What happened next would change both their lives forever, though neither of them knew it yet. As Rain stood there, order pad ready, she had no idea that this ordinary Thursday night would become the talk of social media, or that the man who was about to treat her like she was nothing would soon learn a lesson in humility that would rock Atlanta's business world to its core. The night was young, the restaurant was full, and somewhere in the kitchen, a bottle of artisanal chili sauce sat innocently on a shelf, waiting to play its part in the drama that was about to unfold. The evening at Blue Pearl Restaurant was reaching its peak when everything went wrong. Dev Patel's table had already sent back their appetizers twice, and Rain could feel her heart racing each time she approached them. The investors at his table kept checking their watches, clearly uncomfortable with his growing irritation. "I specifically asked for the spicy tuna roll without sesame seeds," Dev announced loudly as Rain set down the plate. His words were slightly slurred, and the collection of empty wine glasses told their own story. How hard is it to get a simple order right? He didn't even try to lower his voice, making several nearby diners turn their heads. Rain apologized softly. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll have the kitchen prepare a new one right away." She reached for the plate, but Dev raised his hand, stopping her. The restaurant's soft music seemed to fade into the background as tension filled the air. No. Let's talk about this," he said, pushing his chair back, Do you know how much money I've spent at this restaurant? He stood up, towering over her. The other guests at his table shifted uncomfortably, one of them trying to pull at his sleeve to get him to sit down. Sir, please let me fix this for you, Rain said calmly, though her hands were trembling slightly. She'd learned early on that staying professional was the best approach, even when customers lost their cool. The other servers nearby had stopped in their tracks, watching the scene unfold. That's when Dev spotted it, the bottle of expensive chili sauce that another server had just placed on their table. His face twisted into an unpleasant smile as he picked it up. You know what? Since you can't seem to understand what spicy means, let me show you. Everything happened in slow motion after that. Rain saw his arm move, but she couldn't step back fast enough. The red sauce arsed through the air, splattering across her white uniform shirt and face. The restaurant fell dead silent. Someone gasped. A child at a nearby table started crying. Now that's spicy, Dev laughed, but no one joined him. His own dinner companions looked horrified. The chili sauce dripped down Rain's shirt, staining everything it touched. Her eyes stung, but she didn't cry. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Mr. Wong, the elderly restaurant owner, came rushing from his office, having been alerted by another server. His face turned from concern to anger as he took in the scene. What is happening here? He demanded, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by protective fury. Just teaching your staff about quality service, Dev smirked, reaching for his wine glass as if nothing unusual had happened. But his hand was shaking slightly, perhaps finally realizing he'd gone too far. Phones had come out. People were recording. Tomorrow, this would be all over social media, but Rain wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about her textbooks in the break room, about the mock trial she was supposed to participate in tomorrow, about how she'd need to buy a new uniform she couldn't really afford. Sir, she said, her voice steady despite everything, I'll have someone else take care of your table. With dignity she didn't know she possessed, she turned and walked toward the kitchen. Behind her, she could hear Mr. Wong firmly asking Dev and his party to leave the restaurant. In the kitchen, her coworkers rushed to help her clean up. You should sue him, whispered Mai, her friend from the kitchen staff, dabbing at the sauce with a wet cloth. Rich people like that think they can get away with anything. Rain didn't respond. Instead, she thought about the law textbooks in her bag, about the classes she'd been taking in secret, about the legal internship she'd just been accepted to. What Dev Patel didn't know was that he'd just assaulted someone who knew exactly how the law worked, and she wasn't the helpless waitress he thought she was. As she changed into her spare uniform in the staff room, Rain could hear the commotion continuing outside. Dev's loud protests, the murmur of shocked customers, Mr. Wong's firm voice asking them to leave. But instead of feeling defeated, she felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. The morning after the chili sauce incident, Rain sat in the back row of her law school classroom at Carter University, trying to ignore the buzzing phone in her bag. The viral video of last night had already reached over 1 million views. Her classmates were discussing a corporate law case, completely unaware that the waitress in the video trending on their phones was sitting right beside them. Professor Chen was in the middle of explaining contract violations when Rain noticed something interesting. In the front row, 2 young lawyers from Dev Patel's company were taking notes. They often attended these advanced classes as part of their continuing education. Rain sank a little lower in her seat, grateful that they'd never paid attention to the quiet student who always sat in the back. During the break, her close friend Tia rushed over, eyes wide with her phone in hand. Had you seen this? Some rich tech guy threw sauce at a waitress last night. It's everywhere on social media. Rain's stomach tightened as she watched her own humiliation play out on yet another screen. But instead of shame, she felt something else. Determination. Actually, Tia, Rain whispered, pulling her friend into an empty classroom, that waitress was me. She went on to explain everything. The double shifts at the restaurant, the secret night classes, how she'd been working her way through law school while taking care of her younger brother after their grandmother got sick. Taya's jaw dropped. Wait, so you're telling me you're not just top of our class, but you're doing all this while working full-time? And now this guy. She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. Rain, do you realize what this means? With your legal knowledge, you cooled. I know, Rain interrupted, pulling out her notebook. That's why I've been documenting everything since last night. The witnesses, the videos, the restaurant's security footage. But there's more. She lowered her voice. Remember that workplace harassment case we studied last semester? Dev Patel's company has a history of similar incidents. Back in class, Rain watched the two corporate lawyers more carefully. They were frantically texting during Professor Chen's lecture, probably dealing with the PR nightmare their boss had created. Little did they know that the solution to their problem, or perhaps their biggest nightmare, was sitting just a few rows behind them. During lunch break, Rain headed to the library. Between bites of her homemade sandwich, she pulled up news articles about Dev's company. A pattern emerged. Complaints varied, settlements paid, stories hushed up. Her legal training helped her see what others might miss, a systematic problem hiding behind NDAs and corporate lawyers. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her brother. Sis, you're all over TikTok. Are you okay? His worried voice made her smile. I'm fine, kiddo. Actually, I'm better than fine. Remember how Grandma always said everything happens for a reason? As she hung up, Rain spotted Professor Chen approaching her table. The professor had been her mentor throughout law school, though she never knew about Rain's waitressing job. Ms. Chen, she said softly, sitting down across from Rain. I saw the video. I also saw how you handled yourself. That composure, that's exactly what makes a great lawyer. Rain felt tears welling up for the first time since the incident. I've been hiding this part of my life for so long, she admitted. Working at the restaurant, taking care of my brother, studying whenever I could. I was afraid people wouldn't take me seriously as a lawyer if they knew. Professor Chen smiled warmly. On the contrary, your experience makes you exactly the kind of lawyer this profession needs. Someone who understands both sides of the story. She paused, then added, and I think it's time Dev Patel learned who you really are. As the professor walked away, Rain opened her laptop. The homepage of Dev's company showed his smiling face, announcing their upcoming tech conference where he would be the keynote speaker. Rain had been chosen to present her legal thesis at the same conference, a coincidence that now felt like fate. She began typing, a plan forming in her mind. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, not just for her, but for everyone who'd ever been treated as invisible. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Blue Pearl Restaurant as Mr. Wong sat across from Rain, pushing a check toward her. 3 months' salary, he said gently, plus a bonus. All we ask is that you sign this paper and don't pursue the matter further. Rain looked at the check. The amount would cover her remaining tuition and then some. She thought about her brother's college fund, the bills piling up at home, their grandmother's medical expenses. For a moment, her hand trembled over the paper. But then she remembered something her grandmother had taught her. Sometimes the right path isn't the easiest one. Rain pushed the check back across the table. I'm sorry, Mr. Wong. I appreciate your kindness, but I can't accept this. Mr. Wong didn't look surprised. Instead, he smiled slightly. You know, when I first hired you, I saw something different in you. The way you handled difficult customers, how you studied during breaks. You were never just a waitress, were you? Rain felt tears forming in her eyes. No, sir. I'm actually in my final year of law school. She watched his eyes widen. And what happened here? It's not just about me. It's about every person who's been treated this way. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. Another former employee of Dev's company had reached out through social media. This made 15 in total, 15 stories of humiliation, discrimination, and abuse of power, all carefully documented in Rain's growing case file. Back home, Rain found her brother Kai watching the viral video for the 100th time. "Look at the comments, sis," he said excitedly. "Everyone's on your side. Even Dev's business partners are distancing themselves from him." Rain sat down at their small kitchen table, spreading out her notes. The viral video had opened a floodgate. People were sharing their own stories of workplace abuse, particularly in the tech industry. What had started as one horrible night was becoming something much bigger. Her phone rang, Professor Chen calling. "Rain, have you seen the news? Dev's company's stock dropped 12% today. Their damage control isn't working because more videos of his behavior are surfacing." "I know," Rain replied, looking at her laptop screen. "Their PR team is offering me a private settlement. Much more than the restaurant offered." She paused. "They don't know who I really am yet." Professor Chen's voice turned serious. "Rain, you're sitting on something bigger than a simple assault case. This could be a watershed moment for workers' rights in the tech industry." "But," she hesitated, "are you ready for what comes next?" After hanging up, Rain walked to her grandmother's room. The old woman was sitting in her favorite chair knitting. She looked up as Rain entered. "I saw what happened on the news," she said softly. "You're planning something, aren't you?" Rain sat at her grandmother's feet, just like she used to do as a child. "Remember how you used to tell me stories about fighting for workers' rights in the factory? How one person standing up can help many?" Her grandmother nodded, her wise eyes twinkling. "Well," Rain continued, "I've been gathering evidence. Stories from other victims. Documentation of patterns of abuse. It's not just about the chili sauce incident anymore." She showed her grandmother the files on her laptop. "I'm building a class action lawsuit." Her grandmother set down her knitting, reaching for Rain's hand. "You know this won't be easy. Rich men like him, they have powerful lawyers, connections." "I know," Rain replied, squeezing her grandmother's hand. "But guess what? His own lawyers sit in my law classes. They think I'm just another student. And in 3 weeks, I'm presenting my thesis on workplace harassment at the same conference where he's giving the keynote speech." Her grandmother's face broke into a proud smile. Sometimes the best weapon is the one your opponent doesn't know you have. As the evening settled in, Rain received another message, this time from Mr. Wong. The restaurant's security footage was ready, showing multiple angles of the incident. "Use it wisely," his message read. Rain added it to her growing file, knowing that each piece of evidence was another step toward justice. She looked at the calendar on her wall, circling the date of the tech conference. Dev Patel thought he'd taught her a lesson that night at the restaurant. Soon he would learn that he'd picked the wrong person to underestimate. 2 weeks after the chili sauce incident, Rain's small apartment had transformed into a makeshift legal office. Sticky notes covered her walls, and her kitchen table disappeared under stacks of testimonies. Her brother Kai had started calling it the Justice Room. Her phone rang. Another former employee of Dev's company reaching out. "I saw what he did to you," the woman said, her voice shaking. "I was his executive assistant 3 years ago. He threw a hot coffee at me during a meeting. They paid me to stay quiet, but I kept all the emails." Rain added another note to her wall. This was the 23rd person to come forward. Each story followed a similar pattern: angry outbursts, public humiliation, then hushed settlements. But this time would be different. In her law school classes, Rain noticed the mounting tension. Dev's corporate lawyers now attended every session, looking increasingly worried as they whispered about the company's tanking stock prices. One of them even sat next to her during a lecture about class action lawsuits, completely unaware that the quiet student beside them was their biggest threat. At home that evening, Rain's grandmother called her into the kitchen. The old woman was making Rain's favorite soup, the recipe passed down through generations. "Tell me about your progress," she said, stirring the pot slowly. "I see you've barely slept this week." Rain sat at the counter, inhaling the comforting aroma. "Remember Lai Wei from the restaurant? Turns out her cousin works at Dev's company. She connected me with 5 more employees who faced similar treatment. They're all willing to testify." Her grandmother nodded thoughtfully. "And the tech conference? It's next week, isn't it?" "Yes," Rain smiled, thinking about the presentation she'd prepared. "Dev doesn't know it yet, but his keynote speech about workplace innovation will be followed by my thesis on systematic workplace abuse in the tech industry. I've included anonymous case studies from his company." The doorbell rang. It was Tia from law school, carrying more files. "You won't believe this," she said excitedly. "Remember that intern program Dev's company suddenly shut down last year? I found 3 former interns. They all quit after experiencing his abuse." As they spread the new documents across the floor, Rain's phone buzzed with a news alert. Dev had finally made a public statement about the chili sauce incident, calling it a regrettable misunderstanding, and claiming he had a stressful day. The comments under the article were brutal, with people sharing links to other videos of his past outbursts. "Look at this," Kai called from his computer. "His biggest investors are demanding an emergency board meeting. They're worried about the company's reputation." He grinned at his sister. "They don't even know what's coming." Professor Chen had been helping too, reviewing Rain's legal strategy after hours. "Your case is strong," she told Rain that afternoon. "But remember, companies like his have unlimited resources for legal battles. You need to be strategic about this." Rain looked at her presentation notes for the tech conference. She wasn't just preparing a legal attack. She was crafting a moment of truth. The conference would be streamed live, with tech journalists and industry leaders in attendance. It was the perfect stage. That night, as Rain worked late again, she found an old photo of herself from her first day at the restaurant. She'd been so proud to get that job, seeing it as her ticket to law school. Now, 3 years later, everything had come full circle. Her phone lit up with a message from Mr. Wong. "More former employees came to the restaurant asking about you. They want to share their stories. You're giving people courage." Rain looked at her grandmother, who was quietly knitting in her favorite chair. "Are you nervous about next week?" the old woman asked, not looking up from her work. "Not anymore," Rain replied, adding another sticky note to her wall. "Dev thought he was teaching me a lesson about power. Instead, he's about to learn one." As the city lights twinkled outside her window, Rain reviewed her conference presentation one more time. In just 7 days, she would step onto that stage, not as a waitress, not as a law student, but as someone ready to challenge a system that had protected bullies for too long. The storm was coming, and Dev Patel had no idea he was at the center of it. The morning of the tech conference arrived with a buzz of excitement at the Atlanta Convention Center. Rain stood backstage, adjusting her professional navy suit, a far cry from her waitress uniform. Her grandmother had helped her pick it out, saying, "Dress for the person you're becoming, not the person they think you are." From behind the curtain, she watched Dev Patel stride onto the stage for his keynote speech. He looked confident, seemingly recovered from the viral video scandal. The audience of tech professionals and investors filled every seat, their faces lit by laptop screens and phones. "Innovation is about respect," Dev declared into the microphone, making Rain clench her fists. "It's about lifting people up." He continued his speech, unaware that his former waitress was just steps away, preparing to change everything. Professor Chen appeared at Rain's side, squeezing her shoulder. "Your presentation slides are ready. Are you sure you want to do this?" Rain nodded, thinking of all the people who had trusted her with their stories. Dev's speech droned on. "In our company, we value every individual." Rain nearly laughed at the irony. Her phone buzzed. A message from Kai. "Grandma and I are in the 3rd row." You've got this, sis. Finally, it was her turn. The conference moderator announced, "Our next speaker is a distinguished law student presenting research on workplace dynamics in the tech industry." Rain took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. Dev was still gathering his papers at the podium, expecting to simply pass by another boring student presenter. But as Rain approached, something made him pause. There was something familiar about her face, her walk, her quiet confidence. "Good morning," Rain began, her voice steady. "My thesis explores how power dynamics in tech companies can enable systematic workplace abuse." She clicked to her first slide, a compilation of workplace incident reports. Dev's eyes narrowed, still trying to place her. Then she played the clip. The restaurant security footage showed the chili sauce incident from multiple angles. The audience gasped. Dev's face drained of color as realization dawned. The waitress he humiliated wasn't just some service worker. She was standing before him now, commanding the stage. "This incident," Rain continued calmly, "is not isolated. Through my research, I've documented 37 similar cases within one particular tech company." Another slide appeared, showing anonymized testimonies. Dev's lawyers, sitting in the front row, started frantically typing on their phones. The audience was completely silent now, captivated by the unfolding drama. Rain's grandmother wiped proud tears from her eyes as her granddaughter systematically presented 3 years of research, legal analysis, and gathered evidence. "Workplace abuse thrives in silence," Rain declared, making direct eye contact with Dev for the first time since that night. "It persists because people feel powerless to challenge it. Today, that changes." Dev stood up abruptly, but his own security team subtly shook their heads. Causing a scene would only make things worse. He was forced to sit and watch as Rain revealed the pattern of behavior he'd thought safely buried under settlements and NDAs. In conclusion, Rain said, "I present these findings not just as a law student, but as someone who has experienced this abuse firsthand. I'm that waitress from the viral video, and I'm also the person who's about to change how power is exercised in tech workplaces." The audience erupted in applause. Journalists in the crowd were already typing headlines. Dev's board members, watching via livestream, were calling emergency meetings. But Rain wasn't done. She turned to face Dev directly. "Mr. Patel, you thought you were teaching me a lesson that night. Instead, you gave me the perfect case study for my thesis on workplace abuse. Thank you for proving my point so thoroughly." Professor Chen beamed from the sidelines. Rain's classmates, scattered throughout the audience, stood up cheering. Even Dev's own employees were trying to hide their smiles. As Rain gathered her materials to leave the stage, she heard Dev's chair scrape back. He was walking toward her, his face a mix of shock, anger, and something else, respect. The entire room held its breath, wondering what would happen next. The power dynamic had shifted. The waitress he tried to humiliate had just turned his world upside down, and everyone was watching to see how he would respond. The conference hall buzzed with tension as Dev approached Rain after her presentation. Security guards moved closer, unsure what might happen next. But Rain stood her ground, holding her laptop close to her chest like a shield. "Let's talk privately," Dev said, his voice tight with controlled anger. The crowd watched as they moved to a small meeting room off the main hall. Professor Chen and one of Dev's lawyers followed, neutral witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. Inside the room, Dev paced like a caged tiger. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he demanded. "Years of building this company, my reputation." Rain set her laptop down calmly. "Actually, Mr. Patel, you did this to yourself. I'm just shining a light on it." She opened a folder and spread out documents across the table. "These are statements from 37 of your former employees. Each one has a story similar to mine." Dev's lawyer reached for the papers, but Rain pulled them back. "Those are copies. The originals are safe, along with videos, emails, and settlement records. What do you want? Dev asked bluntly. Money? A position in the company? Name your price. His hand reached for his phone, ready to transfer whatever amount she named. Rain shook her head. This isn't about money. It's about change. She pulled out another document, one she'd stayed up all night preparing. This is a proposal for a complete overhaul of your company's workplace protection policies. Professor Chen watched proudly as her student laid out her terms. First, establish a foundation for service workers pursuing higher education. Second, implement a zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment with real consequences. Third, create an independent board to handle employee complaints. Dev's lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he waved her away. For the first time, he was really looking at Rain, not as a waitress, not as a threat, but as someone who'd outsmarted him completely. You know, he said, sitting down heavily, I started as a dishwasher in a restaurant. The room fell silent. Worked my way through college, built this company from nothing. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to be on the other side. Rain hadn't expected this. She'd prepared for anger, for threats, for legal battles, but not for honesty. Your presentation, Dev continued, reminded me of something my mother used to say. Power shows you who a person really is. I guess I failed that test spectacularly. It's not too late to pass it, Rain replied softly. She pushed the proposal toward him. You have an opportunity here, not just to fix your reputation, but to actually make things better. Dev picked up the document, actually reading it this time. His lawyer looked nervous, but he kept reading. This foundation idea, supporting service workers who want to study, it's good, really good. Think about the publicity, Rain added. Instead of being known for throwing chili sauce, you could be known for creating real opportunities. Your choice. The room grew quiet as Dev reached the last page. Outside, they could hear the conference continuing, people discussing Rain's presentation, journalists probably already writing their stories. Finally, Dev looked up. You could have just sued me, taken the settlement money. Why this? Rain thought about her grandmother, still sitting out in the conference hall. About all the late nights studying while her feet ached from waiting tables. About every person who'd shared their story of workplace abuse with her. Because change doesn't happen from just winning a lawsuit, she answered. It happens from changing how people think and act. You have the power to set an example here. Dev stood up slowly, straightening his jacket. Everyone held their breath. Then he did something unexpected. He extended his hand to Rain. Let's work together on this. Not as enemies, but as partners in fixing what's broken. Rain looked at his offered hand, remembering how that same hand had thrown chili sauce at her just weeks ago. But she also saw something different in his eyes now. Understanding, respect, maybe even a hint of gratitude for this wake-up call. She shook his hand. In that moment, both of them knew that this wasn't just about making peace. It was about making history. 1 month after the conference, the headlines told a different story. Tech CEO partners with former Waitress to launch revolutionary worker rights program, read the morning paper. Rain sat in her grandmother's kitchen, sharing the news over steaming bowls of breakfast congee. Look at this, Grandma, she said, pointing to the article. Dev's company just hired their first worker rights director, and they picked someone who started as a janitor and worked their way through business school. The transformation in Dev had surprised everyone. After their confrontation at the conference, he'd thrown himself into the changes with unexpected enthusiasm. His first act was a public apology, not a carefully crafted PR statement, but a raw, honest video addressing his past behavior. I never thought I'd say this, Kai chimed in, scrolling through his phone, but Dev's latest post is actually inspiring. The video showed Dev working a shift at Blue Pearl restaurant, learning what it really meant to be a server. Mr. Wong had agreed to let him experience life on the other side of the counter. Rain's phone buzzed with a message from Professor Chen. Turn on channel 5 now. They rushed to the living room just in time to see Dev being interviewed about the new foundation. The Service Workers Education Fund will provide full scholarships to employees in the service industry pursuing higher education, Dev explained on screen. And yes, the idea came from the very person I once disrespected, a waitress who was secretly putting herself through law school. The interviewer asked about the viral chili sauce incident. Dev didn't dodge the question. That moment of cruelty on my part led to one of the most important lessons of my life, he admitted. Sometimes our worst actions can lead to our greatest transformation, if we're willing to learn and change. Rain's grandmother squeezed her hand. See, sometimes the universe works in strange ways. She pointed at the TV where they were showing clips of Dev's company's new workplace protection programs being implemented. The changes weren't just superficial. Dev had appointed Rain to head an independent review board overseeing workplace complaints. Her first action was to create an anonymous reporting system that protected whistleblowers. The board included former service workers, ensuring that voices from all levels were heard. Later that day, Rain visited Blue Pearl Restaurant. The place looked different now. Dev's foundation had provided funding for renovations, including a small study area in the break room for employees taking classes. Mr. Wong greeted her with a warm smile. Your old locker is now famous, he joked. Every new hire wants to see where you used to study between shifts. The story had inspired other workers to pursue their dreams. 3 servers were now enrolled in evening classes. Rain's phone lit up with another message, this time from Dev himself. Board meeting tomorrow. We're voting on extending the education program nationwide. Bring your legal expertise and your waitressing experience. We need both. As she walked through the restaurant, Rain remembered that horrible night with the chili sauce. The memory no longer stung. Instead, it reminded her of how far they'd all come. A young server approached her shyly. Is it true, she asked, that you worked here while studying law? When Rain nodded, the girl's eyes lit up. I just enrolled in nursing classes. Your story gave me the courage. Back home, Rain found a package waiting. Inside was a frame containing her old name tag from the restaurant, mounted alongside the conference program where she'd revealed her true identity. A note from Dev read, to remind us both where this journey began and how far we can go when we respect every person's dignity. That evening, as Rain prepared for the next day's board meeting, her grandmother brought her a cup of tea. You know what makes me proudest? The old woman said softly. Not that you won against him, but that you showed him how to be better. Rain looked at her presentation for tomorrow. Plans to expand the education program, strengthen worker protections, and create real paths for advancement. The story that began with humiliation had transformed into something powerful. Proof that change was possible, that dignity could prevail, and that sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected teachers. 1 year later, Rain stood at the podium of her law school graduation ceremony. The audience was an unusual mix. Her grandmother and brother sitting next to Dev Patel, restaurant workers in their uniforms who'd taken time off to attend, and dozens of students who'd received scholarships from the foundation that was born from a bottle of chili sauce. Life's greatest lessons, Rain began her valedictorian speech, often come disguised as our biggest challenges. She caught Dev's eye in the crowd. He nodded, both of them remembering how far they'd come from that night at Blue Pearl Restaurant. The Service Workers Education Fund had already helped over 200 people start their educational journeys. Mr. Wong's restaurant had become the pilot location for a program that now spread across 50 restaurants in the city, offering flexible schedules and study spaces for working students. After the ceremony, Rain's grandmother pulled her into a tight hug, tears streaming down her face. If only your parents could see you now, she whispered. Rain held her closer, remembering how her grandmother had supported her crazy dream of working full-time while studying law. Dev approached them, carrying a small gift box. "For the newest member of our legal team," he said, handing it to Rain. Inside was a beautiful nameplate reading Director of Worker Advocacy. The position had been created specifically for her, combining her legal expertise with her first-hand experience of workplace struggles. "You know what's funny?" Dev said, looking around at the celebration. "That night when I threw the sauce, I thought I was showing my power. Instead, you showed me what real power looks like, the power to create positive change." Rain's phone buzzed with messages from former restaurant coworkers who'd started their own educational journeys. Pictures of study groups in break rooms, proud faces in graduation gowns, and stories of promotions filled her screen. The local news was there, covering the story of how a viral video of workplace harassment had transformed into a movement for worker education and rights. The reporter asked Rain about her plans for the future. "This is just the beginning," she replied, gesturing to the group of scholarship recipients gathered nearby. "We're creating a world where no one has to choose between earning a living and pursuing their dreams." Later that evening, back at Blue Pearl Restaurant, Mr. Wong hosted a special celebration. The same table where the infamous incident had occurred was now decorated with flowers. Current and former employees shared stories of how their lives had changed over the past year. "Remember when you used to hide your law books in the kitchen?" Lai Wei, still working as a server while studying business, laughed. "Now we have our own library in the break room." Dev stood up to make a toast. The room fell silent, everyone remembering his last memorable moment in this restaurant. "A year ago, I was a different person," he began. "I thought success was about power over others. Rain taught me that true success is about empowering others." Rain looked around the room, seeing the ripple effects of that one difficult night. The young buzzboy who was now taking coding classes. The hostess pursuing her teaching degree. Each person had a story of transformation. Her brother Kai, now starting college himself thanks to the foundation, nudged her. "Hey sis, remember when you used to say everything happens for a reason? Guess throwing chili sauce at the wrong waitress can change the world." The celebration continued into the night, but Rain stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The restaurant's neon sign glowed against the dark sky, reminding her of all those late nights studying between serving tables. Her phone lit up with one last message from Professor Chen. "Your parents would be so proud. You didn't just win a battle, you started a revolution." Rain smiled, thinking about tomorrow's meeting where she'd present plans to expand the program nationwide. The story that began with humiliation had become a beacon of hope for thousands. Sometimes, she realized, dignity and justice come not from beating your opponents, but from showing them a better way forward. And somewhere in the city, another tired server was studying between shifts, dreaming of a better future. But now, thanks to Rain's story, that future felt a little more possible.